the Tasmanian tiger. In 1930, Tasmanian farmer Wilf Batty had a fateful encounter with an extraordinary creature. What Batty couldn't know was his gunshot didn't merely end the life of a single animal. It marked the death knell for an entire species. Tasmania lies 200 kilometers off the south coast of Australia. An isolated wilderness the size of Ireland, it's famed for its supreme predator. A bizarre creature, it had the body of a wolf and huge jaws, its ultimate weapon. The stripes on its rear earned it the name Tasmanian Tiger. But the most amazing thing about this wolf-like predator is that it wasn't a tiger at all. It was more kangaroo than canine, a wolf with a pouch. A combination which would lead to it becoming one of the most hated and misunderstood animals in history. Ironically, despite its recent extinction, today the Tasmanian tiger is celebrated everywhere on the island. A far cry from the scientific ignorance prevalent while there was still time to save it.
Humans failed at this animal really badly. In particular, scientists failed it really badly. They had the knowledge to save it. But at the same time, deep within themselves, they accepted the idea that extinction was inevitable.
This is the story of an animal that became extinct because humans didn't understand it. It was new to them, and it was different. It was a marsupial.
The whole concept of marsupial inferiority was accepted by scientists. They expected marsupial animals to be weaker, less fit, less capable of surviving, certainly less capable of surviving when Europeans and European animals entered their environment.
During the age of the dinosaurs, marsupials evolved away from other mammals. Isolated in Australia, they developed a unique way of nurturing their young. Instead of growing fully inside the womb, the fetus leaves the mother's body and continues its growth in a pouch. Scientists originally dismissed marsupials like the Tasmanian tiger as primitive and inferior. It's only now, after its extinction, they are studying it properly, using some extraordinary evidence. It died out so recently, amazingly, it was captured on film. For tiger expert Nick Mooney, this is testimony not of an inferior creature, but an extraordinary one.
This tiger was called Ben. We can see the very thick base of the tail and the stripes, very characteristic of Tasmanian tigers. The tiger's walking rather like a dog on its toes, but the pattern of walking is quite different. There does seem an awkwardness, and dogs seem to be more rigid than this animal. This animal seems to have to me, a beautiful fluidity about it when it walks. You notice the animal yawning there. It had the largest gape of any land mammal. They must have had the mother of all bites, these things.
Film footage can tell us about the animal's appearance and behavior in captivity, but it can only go skin deep. Superficially, the Tasmanian tiger may look like Nick's dog, but closer inspection reveals just how much of a remarkable evolutionary mixture this animal really was.
There's some immediate similarity with a dog skeleton, but there's also some really important differences. You notice this tail has very long vertebrae, and it makes the tail very, very stiff, whereas a dog tail is extremely flexible. So looking at the whole skeleton, we have the impression here of an animal with quite a flexible, supple front end. Short vertebrae, and lots of them here. But as soon as we get about halfway down the animal, suddenly the vertebrae become much longer. The other half of it seems to be much less flexible, and in fact, if you cut this in half, you could be excused for thinking the front half and the back half belong to different animals. There's a fundamental change in flexibility from supple to very stiff here. So this is fairly good evidence that the Tasmanian tiger evolved from a hopping ancestor like a kangaroo. As we go forward, the animal seems much more like a dog, a big head with lots of teeth. We have a lot of muscle attachments here to hold that head, a long neck. This was the main fighting end, the main killing end of the animal.
Evolving on opposite sides of the planet, the Tasmanian tiger and the dog adopted a similar design for the same reasons: to chase and kill. But how efficient a predator was the tiger? In the absence of any proper scientific study of the animal before its extinction, this isn't easy to find out. But there is one extraordinary marsupial that might shed light on the question: the Tasmanian devil. DNA analysis reveals that it is one of the Tasmanian tiger's closest living relatives. Devils give zoologist Menna Jones an insight that neither footage nor bones can. First, how it might have stalked its victim.
The tiger was probably not a fast-running predator, not like a wolf. If you look at the skeletal proportions of a tiger and compare these with a wolf and with other marsupial carnivores, they are far more similar to the devil. They had a relatively long foot compared to the thigh bone, and this means they don't run very fast. And the devil doesn't run very fast, but they make up for this with endurance. They can run for a very, very long time.
In the forest, animals are becoming active again after the heat of the day. This mature female is 3 years old. She's made a lair in a small cave, a shelter where she'd be able to rear future cubs. A solitary territorial predator, each day she stalks the forest for prey, her tail stripes helping to keep her camouflaged. Her favourite victims are wallabies, possums and kangaroos. Picking up a scent, she begins her pursuit. Easily pursuing the wallaby for hours through forests, rivers and valleys, her sheer stamina means eventually she'll corner her prey. Now the wallaby is exhausted. It can run no more. But Menna's work comparing devils to the tiger reveals that when it came to eating prey, the two animals were very different. Devils crunch bones like carrots, but the Tasmanian tiger preferred other body parts.
If you look at the lower jaw of a devil, the canine teeth in an adult animal are often broken and they're quite blunt, and most of the molar teeth are also quite blunt. This is because the devil is a bone crusher and it wears its teeth down and it breaks its teeth eating bone. The tiger, even in an adult animal, an adult tiger, has quite sharp canines, they're not broken, and all of the molar teeth remain sharp right through its life. This indicates that the tiger probably ate the soft tissues of the animal, the muscle tissue and the guts, but it probably didn't eat much in the way of bone.
Having crushed and suffocated the animal with her powerful jaws, she uses her sharp teeth to pick out the most tender parts of the kill, the vital organs, the liver, heart and lungs. But despite her successful hunt, the tiger and the rest of her species are living on borrowed time. Its wilderness home was suddenly invaded by the modern world, and the Tasmanian tiger was about to become an object of fear and loathing in the human imagination. The modern history of Tasmania began in 1803 with the establishment of a harsh British penal colony, and some of the earliest encounters with the animal were made by convicts on the run. Convicts often escaped in the forlorn hope they could walk to China or India. Most perished. Some were even forced into cannibalism. One account, written in 1805 after the recapture of two men, describes how they'd returned to risk the cat-o'-nine-tails rather than face what they'd seen.
They informed me that when they were in the wood they saw a large tiger. I make no doubt, but here are many wild animals which we have not yet seen.
This was the first time in recorded history that the animal's stripes led to it being mistaken for a tiger. From that moment on, in the minds of Tasmanians, the tiger became a monster to be feared and killed.
Europeans came from a recent history of having exterminated wolves, lions, every possible predator and dangerous animal, and the Tasmanian tiger suffered exactly that fate.
Yet the precise role humans played in the tiger's demise is still steeped in controversy.
By the end of the 19th century, the Tasmanian tiger is in a lot of trouble. But it's not just the humans out there in the bush and in the farming land which are causing the problem. There's a lot more to the story than that.
By the 1880s, vast swathes of Tasmania had been transformed into pasture to graze millions of sheep brought to the island. This was the beginning of the end for the tiger. Farmers were now on the tiger's hunting grounds, and they were horrified by the discovery of dismembered sheep. Blaming it for the killings, the tiger became their sworn enemy.
In the Tasmanian archives here is this paper trail of evidence about how the animal was hated and feared. Here we have a petition submitted to the government for destroying native tigers. In fact, it reads, "We shall have to abandon the Crown lands occupied by us and give up sheep farming altogether unless some means can be devised for combating this evil." Petitions like this, signed by dozens of influential landowners, of course, are very powerful things in the earlier colonial days.
It was this kind of pressure from the farmers which eventually forced the government to act. In 1888, a public bounty of £1 was introduced for every Tasmanian tiger caught and killed.
So this went on, and here's a government voucher to pay Mr. Brooks In 1894, 10 shillings for destroying one half-grown native tiger, a full-grown tiger being worth £1.
By the end of the 19th century, the Tassie tiger had been indiscriminately slaughtered, both by individuals, encouraged by the Tasmanian government's bounty, which at its peak, the government was paying a bounty on a Tasmanian tiger once every 2 days.
Ironically, the killing was actually unnecessary.
The losses attributed to Tasmanian tigers were greater than the whole population of sheep. In some districts, like, it was quite absurd. The Tasmanian tiger killed some sheep, without question, but it made the perfect scapegoat for general mismanagement. And that mismanagement often came about because people were farming in very unfamiliar areas using unfamiliar techniques.
But out in the bush, trapping tigers had become a lucrative industry. And it wasn't just money that drove the killing. Continued scientific ignorance also played a part. With no studies of the animal in the wild, no one knew exactly how many tigers there actually were, and no one could judge just how the killing was affecting their survival. As the top predator, its numbers would have always been limited, perhaps no more than 3,000 individuals. As many as 2/3 of these may have been wiped out in the bounty years. At the time, few cared.
People didn't understand marsupials. Europeans didn't really have empathy. We're not marsupials, so there's not that basic empathy. We get on so well with dogs because we're not that different from a dog in our social organisation. They're essentially all very social species, and none of the marsupials were. So marsupials didn't cooperate with us.
Marsupial inferiority provided an excuse to accept what was happening, an excuse for scientists to suggest it was inevitable, to possibly put less effort than they might have into saving the species.
In 1909, the final chapter in the extinction of the tiger began to unfold.
100 or so Tasmanian tigers per year were being killed, and this seemed a fairly steady number. But then the population crashed, and crashed very, very suddenly.
In 1909, the killing rate collapsed from 100 each year to just 1. A drastic fall, suggesting it wasn't only trapping that was destroying them.
It was not persecuted over large amounts of its range, and even if we'd lost all the animals in those settled areas, there still should have been a trickle of immigration from those more remote areas. But the fact is, the population seemed to have radically decreased all over its range in Tasmania. History has shown that hunting and trapping alone rarely drives anything to extinction or even near extinction. So something else happened.
The rapid decline suggests something far more deadly than even humans.
It can only have been a disease, and in fact there were sick and dead animals reported with symptoms rather like canine distemper.
Canine distemper is an airborne virus. The initial symptom is fever before a painful death involving discharge from the eye, diarrhea, vomiting, and seizures. Yet marsupials are known to suffer similar viruses all the time without being wiped out. Why might this outbreak have been so devastating?
Almost certainly, if there was no hunting or habitat loss, the disease would have been of little consequence to the population. We think it was probably a viral pneumonia, something reasonably common in marsupials. But in the fragmented state, the fragile state this Tasmanian tiger population was in, that this disease probably started that last drum roll of extinction.
The female tiger is ready to mate, but hunting and disease means she can't find a male. And she herself is now sick. The tiny wild population can no longer replace itself. Extinction now looms. Yet there was one last chance to save the animal. As the Tasmanian tiger got rarer, it became more and more famous.
To me, it's also ironic that science played, or so-called science played a part in the demise of the Tasmanian tiger, in that when people realised this animal looked like becoming extinct, there was this mad rush to catch every last one and put it in a zoo or a collection.
By 1930, the majority of tigers known to still exist lived protected in zoos, yet this wasn't seen as an opportunity to save them.
There was no attempt at all to breed them. There was no attempt at all to do something as obvious and as sensible as breeding them in captivity.
Remaining unbred in captivity, most zoo specimens had died by the 1930s, and sightings in the wild were very rare. At last, there were calls for its protection, though still no one recognized that the Tasmanian tiger was on the very brink of extinction. For farmers, it was still vermin to be exterminated. At Wilf Batty's farm, weakened by disease and desperate for food, the female is driven to go after the easiest prey. What Farmer Batty didn't know was that he had just shot the last Tasmanian tiger ever seen in the wild. At this moment, the tiger passed from reality to myth. Still, no one believed the tiger was extinct, and in the years since then, many have claimed to have seen the animal. It's become a sort of Tasmanian Bigfoot or Loch Ness Monster, but no sightings have ever been proved.
A lot of the reports of people seeing Tasmanian tigers, lots of that sort of anecdotal evidence is definitely a reflection of a yearning to have this animal back.
But no one has seen a live tiger for over half a century.
It's reasonable enough to invoke the 50-year criterion, which says there's been no evidence for 50 years that the animal is extinct.
After Batty shot the last wild tiger, the only individual left was Ben, penned up in Hobart Zoo.
I've sat and watched this black and white film many times, and at times it makes me quite angry. There's still people exist now that would probably exterminate it all over again if they had the chance. Not everyone feels guilty about it. There's a lot of people scattered around the world that don't want big predators about.
There were two final twists. Ben had been misidentified. He wasn't a male tiger, and on the 7th of September 1936, she died. Ironically, for her last 59 days, she'd enjoyed full legal protection as an endangered species.